Well, thank you very much, Jonathan, and I'm delighted to be here. It's a great privilege to address you. As you see from my title, you know, this is somewhere here. There's a pointer. This is a personal reflection there on progress for rare disease patients and families. And over the course of the next few minutes, what I want to do is to try and show how much and how rapidly things have changed over the last 25 years. I feel a little intimidated because, you know, this is an incredibly expert audience, and you will know probably at least as much about this topic as I do. And secondly, are there any lawyers in the room? No? That's good, because it's going to be a lot about legislation, and legislation is inherently boring. So let me begin by apologizing for starting the day off on a low note of legislation and stuff like that. But anyway, we have a long story. If you think about it, we've been making progress for about 200,000 years. Homo sapiens first stuck his or her head above the edge of the Olduvai Gorge in the Rift Valley in Central Africa and looked around and said, blow me, I've got hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. And the kid's got cystic fibrosis. Where did that come from? And since that time, you know, for the next 197,500 years, nobody had a clue. These things just happened. About 2,500 years ago, the ancient Greeks thought that illness was due to movements of the stars and the planets affecting our bodily systems, and you could get the answers by looking outwards, looking beyond. In the Middle Ages, about 800 years ago, we thought that illness was caused by imbalances in the four humours: earth, air, fire, and water. So if you were angry, you had too much fire in you. If you were melancholic, you had too much water in you. And the treatment was based on purging and bleeding, which probably didn't do a lot of good to very many people, and certainly didn't cure very many diseases. About 500 years ago, Vesalius was the founder of human anatomy and started the process of looking into the body for causes of illness and how to affect treatments. And then about a couple of hundred years ago, we went from the idea of miasmas, of bad air, to the idea of germs being causative agents in disease. So we had Semmelweis with his microscope looking at little animalcules in water. We had John Snow with the pump and tracking cholera to dirty water. Pasteur. And then we had Lister and antisepsis, carbolic acid, which made operations much safer for the first time because there was the emerging understanding of sterile procedures. Then 90 years ago, we had antibiotics with Alexander Fleming, Dorothy Hodgkin, and Bayer producing the first commercially produced drug, sulfonamides. And then, of course, 65 years ago, just about when I was learning to walk, Watson and Crick wandered into the bar of the Eagle in Bennett Street and said, hey guys, and it probably was all guys then, I'm afraid, but hey guys, I think we've just won the Nobel Prize. We've discovered the structure of DNA. Don't think those were quite the words they used, but they did know they'd made a very significant discovery. Then, 40 years ago, we started the discovery of monoclonal antibodies, which are now coming into clinical use as effective interventions for an increasing range of diseases. And 18 years ago, approximately, and you know, on this site, amongst others, we got the first draft of the human genome. But today, you know, this year, we're introducing in the NHS in England a genomic medicine service where whole genome sequencing will become routinely available in a growing number of situations for patients and families with rare diseases. Now, the thing that you notice about this is the escalating rate of progress. Things are happening more and more quickly. And the challenge for us is, how can we keep up with the science? How can we realize the benefits in ways that allow the opportunities to intervene to be made available to patients and families who need them, whilst at the same time using this knowledge wisely and sensibly in the broader context of society. And you think about the march of genetics. In 1972, the first gene was sequenced, and in 1976, the first complete genome of a bacteriophage, which was 170,000 base pairs long. So by today's standards, pretty small beer. In 1995, Haemophilus influenzae was sequenced, 1.8 million base pairs, and then 2001, we had the first human genome, 3 billion base pairs. And the cost has fallen off a cliff. You know, the first human genome cost about $2.25 billion to sequence. Today, it's well under $1,000 a genome, and the cost is still falling. Of course, we still have a huge cost associated with understanding what that sequence means, but the science of bioinformatics, the clinical insights that come from things like the 100,000 Genomes project and other developments is showing increasing light on how that knowledge can change healthcare. But why do we think about rare diseases? Well, historically, looking at rare diseases has for a long time provided key insights into the way in which our bodies work. William Harvey in 1657 said, "Nature is nowhere accustomed more openly to display her secret mysteries than in cases where she shows tracings of her workings apart from the beaten path. Nor is there any way to advance the proper practice of medicine than to give our minds to the discovery of the usual law of nature by the careful investigation of cases of rarer forms of disease." And that was true then, but incredibly more true today, where insights into rare diseases, into the underlying biological pathways that cause rare diseases, influence the thinking about much more common conditions. And indeed, there is a body of opinion that says we're moving into an era where there will be no common diseases, because the common diseases will fragment into genomically distinct versions of the condition, each of which will require perhaps a different strategy or a different combination of inputs in order to address it efficiently and safely. Genetic medicine has changed incredibly over the last 25 years. In 1990, when the Genetic Alliance UK, then known as the Genetic Interest Group, registered as a charity, rare and genetic diseases were right on the margins of the health service. Little was known about them, little could be done. There were fewer than 100 clinical geneticists employed in the NHS. Today, the molecular laboratories providing genetic diagnoses, the clinical geneticists number in the hundreds in each of the laboratories around the country. So the profession has escalated in size dramatically. And genetic medicine has gone from being this rather arcane bit of the NHS. It always used to be thought of as the place where paediatricians sent the patients they didn't know what to do with and they'd run out of ideas for, so that you could go to a clinical geneticist and he or she would say, yes, it's probably genetic, end of story. To now, where you have diagnosis, you have increasing numbers of therapies available, more and more that you can do to change the trajectory of disease. There have been some massive research milestones. I've just picked out 3 of them. The human genome sequence in 2001 was obviously a massive step forward. Here on this campus, the DDD project in 2011, which used whole exome sequencing initially to try and establish a diagnosis for hitherto undiagnosable children with developmental delay. And today that project is still delivering results. It's still delivering a diagnosis as they churn the data through and re-examine the information they've got in the light of ongoing new knowledge. And of course, in 2013, Genomics England, the 100,000 Genomes project, established the first and the largest project in the world at that time, with the aim of sequencing 100,000 human genomes. And that completed its recruitment last year, at the end of the year, and it is delivering now an increasing number of diagnoses. Approximately 25 to 30% of those who entered the project have received a diagnosis, and that hit rate is mounting. And of course, as a result, this year we established the NHS England's Genomic Medicine Service with the aim of sequencing 5 million whole genomes by 2025. And I'm not a gambling man, but I wouldn't mind betting that that target will be achieved a long time sooner, a lot sooner than 2025, as the value of having the insight into a patient's genome, particularly for children where you have an otherwise undiagnosable condition. You know, you don't have to go through that tremendous diagnostic odyssey of test after test after test, of visiting different clinicians who go, well, it's not that, but I don't know what it is, and referring you on will be cut short. Progress along the way, this is just some of the legislation. In 1990, there was the Human Fertilization Embryology Act, which set up the Human Fertilization and Embryology Authority to regulate not only the use of assisted conception, artificial reproductive support, but also to enable the ethical use of embryos in human research. And Genetic Interest Group was founded in order to support that development in the face of a strong challenge to the whole idea of embryo research and assisted conception from some of the so-called pro-life groups and those with a religious take on some of these potentially contentious issues. In 1995, the Disability Discrimination Act established rights for disabled people, and Genetic Interest Group, now Genetic Alliance UK, was active in promoting that and the recognition that you don't want legislation that waits until you're symptomatic to kick in. You know, otherwise you run the risk of, as it were, getting your retaliation in first, and with the advance of genetics, seeing that, well, you're not sick now, but we can see you going to, so we won't include you to avoid problems. Genetic Interest Group, Genetic Alliance UK, was active in getting the recognition of the predictive nature of genetics in terms of many later onset conditions needs to be taken account of when interpreting. In 2000, we engaged with the European Medicines Agency, with the European Commission and Parliament to push for the development of orphan medicinal products regulations. And that's been a huge success. There are now something like 2,000 indications with an orphan designation, and coming up to 200 licensed drugs for specific orphan or rare conditions. In the previous 10 years, there had been something like 5 approaches to the European Medicines Agency with the possibility of influencing rare conditions. In 2007, the Advanced Therapy Medicinal Products Regulations set the framework for the licensing of gene and stem cell therapies. And we are now seeing those therapies beginning to come onto the market. You know, for treatment of some very rare conditions, there are now therapies for things like severe combined immune deficiencies, for spinal muscular atrophy, and a growing number of other therapies in the pipeline and under development, which stand with the potentially, to be curative rather than treatments, which is absolutely astonishing. In 2009, the Council of Ministers of the European Union passed their recommendation calling on member states to produce plans or strategies for rare diseases. For those of you who wonder why it's plans or strategies, it's because the French do planning, whereas in the UK we have strategies. And of course, you know, in the sort of popular myth, anything the French do must be wrong a priori. So we need a strategy, not a plan. But that was developed, and in 2013, Earl Howe launched the UK strategy for rare diseases, which was a significant milestone. It was the first time the 4 health ministers of the UK had come together to produce a common document for addressing the issues of those with rare diseases. It was a 5-year strategy. It covered research, it covered treatment, it covered coordination of care, it covered diagnosis, and importantly, it recognized the necessity of involving patients and families. That's been running now. It expires at the end of next year, and as we'll hear from the Minister later on today, there is an expectation, a commitment that when that strategy expires, the issue won't be done and dusted, but there will be a continuation, whether it's a strategy or is currently referred to as a framework, remains to be seen. But I think it's important to recognize the key contribution that 2 particular ministers have made to the advancement of political awareness of rare diseases. Earl Howe was the first. He was one of the 92 hereditary peers in the House of Lords. Nicola Blackwood, now Baroness Blackwood, has a rare disease herself. She's very public about that. I'm not disclosing anything that's not in the public domain. And both of those, from different perspectives, have a unique insight into how, you know, accidents of genetics can influence your life choices in ways that perhaps you didn't anticipate. But diagnosis is the key. You know, if you haven't got a diagnosis, you don't know what's happened, you don't know what to expect, you don't know will it happen again, you don't know if there's any intervention available, because without diagnosis there can be no cure. And in terms of our ability to make a diagnosis, we've gone from studying the movement of the planets to the movement of molecules. You know, we've gone from that sort of broad brush, well, probably Venus was ascending in the house of Mars, and that's why you feel the way you do, to the point of being able to look, that is a change in a single base pair in a particular gene in your body. And once you've got that precision, you can work out the pathway that is affected and think about how to intervene. So today, and looking forward to tomorrow and the day after, we now have more than 6,000 identified rare diseases. 80% of these are genetic, so not only do they affect families horizontally, they potentially affect across generations. You have a vertical impact. And there are approximately 1 in 17 or 3.5 million people affected in the UK today. That's, you know, roughly equivalent to the population of Wales. So it is not a trivial health issue. The NHS spends a lot of energy and money providing interventions that don't necessarily alter that, but provide support, but not necessarily altering the course of the disease. And fewer than 5% of rare diseases have currently a disease-modifying therapy. So we need research. And as Jonathan said, we have the tools now. We are the first people to walk this planet who have access to those insights, who have the opportunity to create the interventions that will alter the trajectory of many of these horrendous life-limiting conditions. But we need translation so that the new knowledge becomes changes in clinical care, becomes greater understanding in the management and the delivery of services and support. And importantly, we need access. The best drug in the world is useless if it stays on the pharmacy shelf and never gets the opportunity to affect the patients it's targeted at. That means coordinated action by health services, by policymakers, by industry, by regulators, and by patients and families as stakeholders in the process. And while we're waiting for curative interventions, we need access to comprehensive, user-friendly, timely, equitably delivered services and support. We also need to take a forward look. There are elephant traps in the road ahead. Healthcare is a finite resource. We need to make sure we use those resources wisely. We couldn't get through today without mentioning the B word, the uncertainties caused by Brexit, the potential harm that our departure from the European Union will do to the delivery of healthcare, to the opportunities for research in this country, is unquantified. But we know already that thousands of EU citizens who have worked in the NHS as nurses, as doctors, as other healthcare professionals, have already left. The numbers applying to come here have dropped by 95% since the referendum. That has a huge impact on just the delivery of care, never mind the potential impact on research. So, we need to prepare for and to look out for those adverse consequences that will almost certainly arise from Brexit. You can tell I'm not a foam-flecked Farageist in this, but there we go. But however, we should always look on the bright side of life, to quote a movie song, because I think there is cause for optimism. The motto of the Royal Tank Regiment is from mud through blood to the green fields beyond. For the last 199,900 and whatever years, we were in the mud of ignorance. We didn't know how genetic diseases were caused. We had no insight, no opportunities to acquire that knowledge. Over the last 60 years, we've struggled, we've fought, we've campaigned, we've researched, we've invested, we've used our creativity and our ingenuity to get those insights. And we can see the green fields beyond. We can see the opportunities for developing effective interventions. The challenge is to make sure that we seize that moment and bring forward. In the patient movement, there is a phrase, nothing about us without us. Patients are no longer content to be the passive recipients of care. You'll take this and be grateful whether it works or not. No, we are part of it. And the phrase, nothing about us without us, is one that resonates with patients and families. It's the first use of this was not in healthcare, but it shows that there's no such thing as a new idea. Just good ideas get recycled. And the first use I found of this was in the Polish Constitution of 1505, which says, nihil de nobis sine nobis. Nothing about us without us. That's not Polish, by the way. And we can be optimistic. Lincoln Steffens in 1919, coming back from Moscow after the Bolshevik Revolution, said, I've seen the future and it works. I think he was possibly being optimistic there, but the message is clear that we can see the future. We are seeing things that work, that are radical, and that do deliver huge progress in healthcare. And in the era of Trump, I'd like to hark back to the optimism of Barack Obama. Yes, we can. I don't believe there is any issue that cannot ultimately be solved by human ingenuity if we devote enough resources, enough application, enough commitment, enough ingenuity, enough entrepreneurship, enough engagement to make it happen. So I think the future is optimistic. It's not blindly optimistic, but there are opportunities there which we must seize. So on that note, if you have been, thank you very much. Right, yes, a couple of questions here. Can we have Franklin rightly alongside Watson and Crick, please? Of course we can. Of course we can. Yes, I should have mentioned Rosalind Franklin. There you go. She didn't go to the. She didn't go into the Eagle in Bennett Street, so it kind of didn't make the anecdote. But there you go. Less than 5% have a disease-modifying therapy. Is that just the UK? No, no. It's globally. Do people conflate personalised medicine with personalised care? I don't think, I mean, obviously I can't speak for people, I can only speak for myself. But yes, I think we need to make the difference between personalised medicine, which is the targeted use of therapies based on a set of clinical symptoms and other diagnostic tools, with the delivery of user-friendly personalised care, which is a much broader issue involving not just medicines, but health and social care and education and community organisations and so on. And is there anybody here who's representing an NHS highly specialised service? Oh, this is somebody asking from the National Aspergillosis Centre at Manchester University Trust on whatever it was, stand 5, I think that was, it's gone. Are biotech companies effective drivers of drug development? They're drivers of drug development. I think probably there is room for improvement there. And what is today's cost to sequence a genome in the UK? Well, you know, it's cheap. I don't know what the relative costs are, but I'm sure it can be worked out.